crowded Democratic primary, and another candidate is promising that he will be the one to defeat Senator Lindsey Graham. I'm talking to Brandon Brown, and we are going to talk about his platform, the controversial issues, and his strategy for taking down a GOP powerhouse. I'm Nick Reagan, and this is We The Palmetto. We talked to Lowcountry voters. Trump was in true campaign form. Voting is officially underway. Joe Biden spoke here in the heart of downtown.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Joining me now is Brandon Brown, a candidate for the U.S. Senate seat, taking on Lindsey Graham and a whole host of Democrats as well. First off, thanks for coming in.
It's good to be here at 5 Live, and thank you for having me this morning.
Okay, well, let's talk about who you are for just a moment, because I pulled a little blurb off of your website. I also think it's like your Facebook profile bio as well. Here's what it says. It says, small business owner, Christian, former vice president of 3 HBCUs, and fifth-generation South Carolinian, running for the U.S. Senate to defeat Lindsey Graham, to protect our democracy and stand up for working families. What's not mentioned in here, which I found very fascinating, was a mention of a party affiliation. Was that intentional, or does that mean anything?
No, we're a lifelong Democrat. We're committed to the Democratic Party. You know, I voted for Joe Biden in the last primary election, and I've worked for Joe Biden. We oftentimes label ourselves in the traditional setting of a particular party. My party of focus is people, because people are hurting, and people need somebody to stand up for them and represent the true interests of South Carolinians.
Well, you say again in your website, there are too many South Carolinians that feel like the system is rigged and they're right. Talk to me about that rigged system. What parts of the system are rigged, and how do you fix them?
Well, we know through this new bill that this administration has passed, 27 million people are going to be affected with their health care costs. We know that on average, that's about $15,000 per person in the state of South Carolina when it comes to the expenses of health care. And instead of protecting rural hospitals, we're seeing this bill close rural hospitals. And instead of accepting the money to expand Medicaid and Medicare, we're turning it away. So in South Carolina, we have some of the highest rates of high blood pressure, diabetes, and cholesterol issues. We need to be at the forefront and getting research dollars in here and by expanding the healthcare system to protect South Carolinians.
Well, you talk about lowering costs for both care and prescription drugs. You also talk about something that I think a lot of people are not, they don't put at the forefront of the healthcare issue. It's always sort of on the fringe, but I think if people run into this issue, they've run into it, and that is, the prior authorization thing. You make a point of it on your website to talk about it, and I'm hoping that you might be able to expand a little bit more on how you would deal with the issues with prior authorization.
Well, what we see is with the deregulation of health insurance, we're seeing now that when you go to the hospital or you need outpatient surgery, that the insurer, what a hospital has to call the insurance agency, and they determine whether or not they're going to pay for the insurance. And if you're given a no sign, that means you have to pay out of pocket. Many South Carolinians can't afford to do that. And so instead of giving in to the insurance companies, I want to protect the people who need these type of surgeries or different type of medications or long-term treatment. Particularly, we're seeing now arthritis is becoming a humongous issue in South Carolina. And we have to do what we can to stand up for these citizens who don't have a voice.
I just wonder how you do that, though. I mean, so many people run on fix the healthcare system. We've seen it ever since the healthcare system really was started. What can you do to actually make change in this particular issue?
Well, first of all, you have to have a United States Senator from South Carolina that's going to go to Washington, D.C. and rightfully bring back home the bacon for South Carolinians. We can no longer just give our monies to other states and not stand up and say, you know what, this part of the pot is ours, and we need better doctors. We need better people that are trained in therapy and rehabilitation. So what we have to do is have somebody that's actually going up there and saying, hey, I'm going to fight to get this back to my state, instead of saying, oh, I'm not worried about it, send it somewhere else. So that's the first key for me.
Do you think that healthcare is your number one issue?
I think healthcare is the number one issue in South Carolina. Even what we've seen just over the last few months with this in the upstate region, particularly Spartanburg, with the measles outbreak. We cannot take healthcare for granted. We have to include nutrition in what we're doing within our school systems, and that's why I'm in favor for going in, working with the Department of Agriculture, making sure our children have good food and our seniors have good food. We cannot just look at healthcare with physical health, but we also have to look at mental health. Mental health is an issue. People, we see this increasing persons going and shooting up places. We cannot not pay attention. But the bottom basic line is people of poverty are the people who are typically with the worst health, and the people who have the biggest areas of mental health is in the sense of not getting that good training and good nourishment. And that's what we have to focus on. It's a holistic approach, not just one side of it.
But how do you pay for something like that? Because this is the big question with healthcare: is you have all of the government programs, someone's got to pay for it. I mean, is there a solution here?
Well, one of the things is we got to get rid of these tariffs. You know, the cost of tariffs, most people who were looking at the ways to have affordability within the healthcare system, because the Affordable Health Care Act, which was known as Obamacare, and Obama actually cared, created a pathway where we could drive down prescription drug costs, but also making sure that we protect the interests of insurance companies. So we have to have a fair playing field to where insurance companies are just not taking advantage and prescription drug companies are not just taking advantage. So it has to be a fair playing field. And we can do this in the United States Senate, working with the members of the House to come up with legislation that really addresses how we protect Americans during this healthcare crisis, which I think is happening.
I mean, how do you work with Republicans, though, to make that happen? Because in the Senate, I don't foresee Democrats picking up more than, a total of 60 seats in the Senate, even in a landslide midterm. It probably isn't in the cards. Gonna need Republicans to get on board with any initiative that you want to get passed. I mean, can you work with Republicans?
This democracy was built on a system to where you had people engaging with each other. You know, the roadmap is here in South Carolina. We saw that we had Strom Thurmond and Fritz Hollins. Both worked to better South Carolina. When it comes to the interests of South Carolinians, you have to have somebody that's going to stand up. It's not a Republican or a Democrat issue, but it's an issue for what's best for the state. So you have to work across the aisle. Now, you can have a disagreement, but it's the way that we communicate that we can come together and say, you know what, how do I put South Carolinians first? What is the best interest of expanding education? What's the best way to protect our farmers here in South Carolina? And what's the best way to build infrastructure so we can move our products, so we can trade? This is not a Democrat or a Republican issue, but a South Carolina issue, and we have to work together to achieve that goal of making this the best state.
You talked a little bit about the healthcare issues in the upstate. I think immediately of the measles outbreak. There are some bills in the State House right now that would require people to get vaccinated for measles. Is that something that you would support?
I think vaccinations is the pathway, but I also think that we need to educate ourselves. A lot of the people who in the upstate region that were experienced the outbreak of measles were people that were immigrants from Ukraine and Russia. And so we have to make sure that when a part of our process is that we know that people that are coming into the country are properly vaccinated. So I want to make sure that we provide the opportunity for vaccination. You know, I believe people have a human right for their own body, but I also believe that for the best interest of the overall population, we have to put the measures in place to protect all citizens.
On your website, you mention voting rights and expanding voting access to really all Americans. You say something along the lines of you want to expand early voting and mail-in voting as well, and that you oppose gerrymandering. We know that Republicans are pushing to redistrict at least the 6th congressional district to make it more competitive. I wonder how you manage to, or where you would try and create guardrails to make sure that there is no voting fraud, which is, again, one of those Republican issues that they bring up every time we talk about mail-in votes and early voting expansion. How do you prevent voting fraud?
Well, we know that President Lyndon Johnson, and working with Dr. Martin Luther King for this Voting Rights Act, we know that it had to be renewed, and under President Bush, he did it. And we are now seeing in the Supreme Court this critical decision on whether we're going to protect the Voting Rights Act. And so what we want to do is we want to continue to be a mantelpiece of putting the people first. If you're an American citizen, you have an obligation to shape and form this democracy, and that is through your vote. And I want to be an advocate for making sure that citizens have the pathway to make it easier, not difficult, because what we're doing and what we're seeing is a attitude of trying to suppress a certain community. Access to voting is critical. We, instead of making issues of people standing in voting lines and can't get a bottle of water, that's not the democracy we live in. We should be encouraging people to participate in this process. And what we have to do is hold our elected officials accountable and talking with them and saying to them, hey, why you want to take away somebody's right? People fought for the right to vote. Women fought for the right to vote. And I'm going to be a champion of making sure that we have legislation in place that's going to protect voting rights.
Are voter ID laws a bridge too far for you?
You have to have a driver's license to drive a car. You have to have, the ability to communicate with people who you are, where your residence is. It's not a huge issue. The issue is not whether people are going to get voter ID cards or make sure they're registered, but it is making sure it's about a fair process. We should be doing more to inform people what's going on than to hinder what's happening.
So you're not necessarily opposed to voter ID laws, but as long as the process to get, informed is clear for everyone.
No, I'm not opposed to it. What I'm opposed to is people saying that elections are rigged, and people that give of themselves to work in these areas are being targeted. It shouldn't be a system that because I didn't win, I'm going to cry like a baby. Stand up like an adult and accept the consequences. And people need to stop with this myth that the election was stolen. The elections are the elections. We have systems in place. I trust the people working in the election system, and we can accept the outcome of elections.
I'm going to get to just a couple of controversial issues in just a second. But first, I want to talk about affordable housing. You, again, in your platform, you've mentioned that you want to expand affordable housing, create living wages, things like that. Such a difficult issue, right? Something that we see folks struggle with all the time, even just here in Charleston. How do you encourage private companies to establish a living wage? And how do you encourage private and even public institutions to setting rent or setting mortgages at a price that people can afford? Are these two issues connected?
Oh, absolutely. We know here in South Carolina, you can't go to Burger King and get a Whopper meal for less than almost $10. $7.25 is not a livable wage. And so when we look at the model like at a Chick-fil-A where they pay their employees more, you have a workforce that's more inclined to get up and go to work and provide that service because they're getting a good wage. So we have to look at industry, and we have to encourage these people that are in the position of creating more income for families and say to them, the better that we position a worker to have a good wage, they can then pay for their family to have a good home, they can pay for their family to have a adequate education, and they can put food on their table. Now, here in South Carolina, we know that we need just about 74,000 more houses, affordable houses built. And I'm not talking about affordable houses where you come in and you gentrify a community and then you come back with houses priced in the $350,000 to $400,000. I'm talking about houses that people, again, that are making a livable wage can afford, because it's about, if you can get a child in a house with good nutrition and prepared, then they perform better at school. So it's about creating that pathway to good wage equals good home equals a better productive citizen, and we then start seeing the crime rate go down because people have now opportunities to earn money, and they're not sitting there hungry and frustrated with a system that's not helping them.
Do you think that there's a disconnect between the average person trying to buy and afford a home and the people in Congress that are setting economic policies? And I think about it like this. When my parents bought their first house in the late 80s, maybe early 90s, it was before I was born. I believe they bought it for about $90,000, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in the middle of Alabama. And I'm also 90% sure that when my father graduated college, he was making more money than I was when I graduated college 30 years later. And I just wonder if there isn't a disconnect in how the people in Congress are setting economic policy and the people who are living in those economic policies are sort of perceiving affordability right now.
Well, there is a big difference across this country when it comes to affordability. Different regions, the cost of living is different. So I think we have to be practical in understanding the particular congressional district or the states, as far as a senator would do, in the sense of what costs are, what the affordability of living in Charleston, Columbia, or Greenville is far different than Manning in King Street or over in Abbeville, because of you're in a rural community. So we have to look at how we can create a balance of making sure that these underserved communities are not forgotten. And those are the places where we see the highest rate of health issues, the highest rate of education issues, and high rates of crime, because we're not addressing the fundamental issues of how do we provide people with critical access to get in position to have a better quality of life. Like you just said, I can remember when my dad was working, a young man, and out there with 3 kids, and he couldn't make it off of a paycheck from being a teacher. He had to have another job because he had to provide. And that's the story of South Carolinians. We have these jobs, and we have to work 2 and 3 jobs just to make it, to sustain our families. Mm-hmm. And if we can increase the wage and have a better playing field, South Carolinians wouldn't have to work as hard.
Oh, that would be great. I mean, I'd love to not work as hard. But that being said, I know that, every generation does work extremely hard to get to where they need to be so they can provide for their families. You've mentioned the rural community a couple of times now, the farming community as well. South Carolina has a large rural community. I mean, there's very rural parts of the state, and many of them are seeing population declines. They're seeing struggles in whether it's prices for farmers, whether it's tariffs impacting seed prices or crop prices, or just aging communities that don't have access to the health care that they need in, like, Kingstree, for example. I was just up there a couple months back, and they were opening a new senior center, which was great. And I believe Jim Clyburn was out there. He was instrumental in getting the funding for all of that. I wonder if it's too much to say that Republicans have forgotten about the rural community in South Carolina. Is that fair?
Well, the Republicans have been in control of the House and the Senate, and obviously with supermajority, so the pointing the finger can't just be pointed at Democrats. You just mentioned Kingstree, my mom's hometown, where my grandparents met. And I often think about in South Carolina places like St. Helene, where we have Barefoot Farm. And at that particular place, he talks about, because he's not getting the subsidies that other bigger farmers and institutes get, it affects it. So Mr. Barefoot said to me, I don't know if I would encourage people to go into farming during this day and age because of the lack of resources. And we got to take it a step further. We, in the Department of Commerce, they have a Western Hemisphere International Trade Administration, which teaches people how to trade internationally their product. So we have to educate people on the resources that the federal government can provide.
Yeah.
We have to go into the Department of Agriculture and talk about the projections of the needs of what we're going to need. What are some of the critical issues we're going to need? We're going to need milk to strengthen our bones. We're going to need to make sure that we have wheat. So it's a combination of things here in South Carolina that we do well. And one of the biggest producers is soybeans. And we have to strengthen our ability to trade soybeans, because you can take a soybean product and just about make 128 different things. So we have to be smarter of how we approach this ag, and we have to make investments, and we have to expand the programs at our agricultural institutions here in South Carolina.
Yeah, maybe eventually pass another farm bill at some point. Let's get controversial one more time here. Republicans have beaten Democrats over the head on the transgender rights issue. I want to know where you stand on transgender rights, whether or not transgender women should be able to use bathrooms of the female bathrooms and play in sports with female opponents. Just break down your position on this.
Well, I noticed that in the Republican race for governor, each of those candidates has made that at the top of their platform. And if they want to hash that out on a state issue, I'll let them do that. I'm going to stay focused on providing health care that can adequately sustain our state and our citizens. And, we understand that when you're born a male and a female. And we have to do everything to enhance and improve the quality of life of both female and males.
So it's a distraction issue for you?
Well, I mean, it's here in South Carolina, it's not a big issue the way that they portrayed it. We take things in South Carolina that are distraction issues. We should really be focusing on health care, education, and good jobs. When we start getting into all this other stuff, it is a distraction. This state that we call South Carolina, we don't have high rates of abortion, but yet we want to have this conversation centered and focus on it. We need to be focusing on those people that need care and education and food. This is the pathway how we eradicate poverty, not these issues that everyday working class citizens are talking about or discussing.
I'm going to give you your final pitch to voters in a second. But first, I want to know, should you get elected, what committees would you want to serve on?
Health and Human Services would be one ideal one. I want to be a part of championing for education and United Department of Commerce. I want to really talk about how we have, again, going back to good affordable jobs. Also, I would love to serve on veteran affairs, because I think we mistreat our veterans in this country, and we have to stand up and do a better job to give them access to resources. So those are top three, and just really being an advocate for South Carolinians and being a fighter for them.
Okay. All right. Well, now's the shot here. Give us the closing statement. Why should voters pick you, especially in a crowded primary, but also when it comes to the general election, when you have to take on sort of a powerhouse Republican right now?
Well, I don't see Senator Graham as a powerhouse anything. He traveled the world with John McCain, and he called John McCain his brother. This senator who was on TV saying that President Trump was a racist. Now Trump gets elected, Lindsey's his best friend. We have to have people that stand on morals and values. And I say to everyday South Carolinians that I understand the struggle with somebody in Pickens County. I understand the economic challenge that veterans who are homeless in Florence County are experiencing. And I understand what it looks like and feels like when people don't have hope. Jesse Jackson said, keep hope alive. We have to have a candidate who's going to be arguing every day for the interests of South Carolinians and putting South Carolinians first, serving purpose, not power, and being a part of this great democracy to stand up and say, yes, I will protect the Constitution, and yes, I will stand up for South Carolinians. And so just remember, on Election Day, Brandon Brown won't let you down.
Wow, serving, how did you put it? Serving purpose, not power?
Yes.
There's your tagline right there. All right, Brandon Brown, running for Senate. Thank you so much. Appreciate you coming in.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
And make sure you don't miss a single episode of We the Palmetto by subscribing anywhere you get your podcasts, or you can watch the video version of this episode and all previous episodes on the Live 5 streaming service on apps like Roku. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next week.